Imagine traveling down a trail for the better part of a decade and suddenly coming upon a fork in the road. You look down one path and see a straight shot of recognizable terrain echoing the well-trodden steps that you'd already been taking for the past several years. It's friendly, inviting, and most of all, familiar. But then there's this other path, unkept and overgrown. It quickly curves out of sight, leaving nothing but the frightening and intriguing unknown around the bend. That fork in the road is where nearly every single video game developer found themselves in the mid-90s during a period of intense transformation across the industry. The leap in hardware power provided by a new generation of consoles, primarily the Nintendo 64 and original PlayStation, proved to be a unique turning point for established franchises across all genres. That left developers with a major question. Do you play it safe and continue making games that feel like incremental updates upon their predecessors? Or do you embrace the change, lean into the technological curve, and take the risk of creating something that feels truly revolutionary?
Of course.
And yeah, for a lot of beloved franchises of the 8 and 16-bit era, the transition from 2D to 3D wasn't always handled with style and grace. For every generation-defining, medium-evolving masterpiece like Super Mario 64, Final Fantasy VII, and Metal Gear Solid, we had this, and this, and also this.
What could possibly go wrong?
But somewhere in the middle sits Mega Man Legends, Capcom's attempt to bring their iconic blasting and platforming mascot into the modern era. And while it's been mostly forgotten to history thanks in part to the worst possible timing imaginable, more on that later, the game exudes a confident sense of style and identity that I can't help but adore nearly 30 years later. But first, a little bit of backstory. Following its debut in 1987, Mega Man quickly became one of Capcom's tentpole franchises, amassing oodles of mainline games, handheld ports, evolutions like X, and even wonderfully weirdo spin-offs like Mega Man Soccer. As the 90s pressed on and hardware offered the potential to create 3D worlds, the series continued this affinity for branching out. Capcom had already seen massive success in the 3D space with Resident Evil, a spiritual successor to the 2D Famicom horror game Sweet Home. So for a franchise as beloved as Mega Man, the sky seemed the limit for the transition to 3D.
Follow the cheese!
While this wasn't technically the first trip into the third dimension for the Blue Bomber, the less said about Mega Man Battle Chase and impressively brazen Mario Kart clone, the better. Mega Man Legends would ditch the familiar choose-your-own-level and amass an armory of weapons forged from the bosses you've beaten formula of the mainline installments, instead delivering a micro-open-world action RPG that leaned heavily on a whimsical story, lighthearted characters, and dangerous dungeons to survey. While this new direction was certainly bold, its departure from the formula ended up being a tough pill for many fans to swallow, something that seems to be a recurring motif when many of Capcom's biggest franchises try to pivot.
Boy, that new engine sure is something. Completely different from the old one.
Mega Man Legends was directed by Yoshinori Kawano, who's still killing it at Capcom, most recently on the Resi 4 Remake's excellent Separate Ways DLC. It was released in Japan at the end of 1997 under the name Rockman Dash, and yes, it continued the time-honored tradition of Japanese box art perfectly understanding the assignment while the US scrambles to finish its homework on the bus. And just a side note, there is no shortage of incredible art surrounding this series, including this recent vinyl soundtrack from the folks at Limited Run. Just really cool stuff.
Here we go!
It would be almost another full year until the PS1's Mega Man Legends made its way to the US in September of 1998. And it turns out that was the worst timing imaginable, as it kicked off arguably the most iconic season in video game history.
With both packs, you can catch them all.
A few weeks later, Pokemon Red and Blue made their debut in the West, followed closely by the likes of Metal Gear Solid, Grim Fandango, and Half-Life. But the real nail in Mega Man's coffin was November 98's The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. You see, Mega Man Legends came during the infancy of third-person 3D games. Not just silent film era infancy, but like Lumiere brothers projecting footage of a train approaching the camera, causing audiences to run out of the theater in sheer panic infancy. The PlayStation hadn't even introduced the dual analog controller yet, meaning that Capcom was forced to figure out how to let players navigate this 3D world using a decidedly 2D input method.
What are you looking at?
This experimental clunkiness became all the more apparent once Ocarina of Time landed. While Mega Man was figuring out the verbs and adjectives of this new language, Nintendo dropped an entire dictionary on us that would act as one of the blueprints for 3D adventures going forward. In its monumental shadow, Mega Man Legends feels, I don't know, like quaint might be the word I'm looking for. And fittingly, Legends would eventually make its way to the Nintendo 64, but not until early 2001 in the US, which was just crazy late. By then, the Sega Dreamcast had already released and peaked, the PS2 was gearing up for its stellar 2001, and all eyes were on the launch of the GameCube and original Xbox. But even with all that history and baggage behind us, revisiting Mega Man Legends in 2024 was a genuinely delightful experience that got me thinking about an alternate timeline where this game was a massive hit and sparked continued 3D evolutions in the same way that Mario, Zelda, and Sonic did. Before I even got into the game itself, I was treated to one of my favorite console startup screens, directly followed by one of my favorite developer splash screens. This combo does such a fantastic job of transporting me back to an incredibly specific time and place, and has so much more character compared to its modern counterparts.
Here we go!
As soon as the gameplay begins, it's fascinating to see what a departure the highs of Legends feel like from its predecessor. The 2D Mega Man games were all about precise platforming, enemy pattern recognition, and creative expression through acquired boss weapons. But if I had to name a single standout element of Mega Man Legends, it would be none of those things. For me, Legends stands the test of time because of its phenomenal Saturday morning anime vibes.
All right, everyone, quit digging! Our priority now is to get rid of our little blue friend, all right?
I adore the vibrant sense of life infused throughout this game. Take a look at this moment from just after the prologue. Smoke billows from the crashed ship, clouds slowly move across the sky, our friends are pacing around assessing the situation while our monkey pal just jams out, and Mega Man Volnut himself breathes in the fresh air. Seriously, I could just watch this on loop for hours. And side note, as much as I love the somber typewriters of Resi, pulsating polyhedrons of Symphony of the Night, and flirty codec conversations of Metal Gear Solid, I think society would be better off if more games used dancing chimps as their save points. So you might notice that I haven't really talked too much about combat yet, and that's because it honestly did not leave a huge impression on me. While the various dungeons feel dangerous in a really great way, their aesthetics are a bit bland, especially when compared to how much character each dungeon in Ocarina of Time had. And the aforementioned imprecise nature of early 3D controls and camera movement meant that combat always felt clumsy, especially in some of the more hectic boss battles. But honestly, those complaints fade away the moment you enter a place like Apple Market, where the vibes are just immaculate. The incredible music, colorful storefronts, expressive faces, and a wealth of small details all fold together to create one of my favorite towns on a console that was filled with my favorite towns. I absolutely adore that you can just kick this random can, and getting it behind the counter nets you a little bit of cash. What a great touch that is completely unnecessary, but totally appreciated.
Hey, Trom, how do you stop this thing?
Throughout the game's 10-ish hours, there's a nice loop of story progression, spelunking in dungeons to gather materials, upgrading your weapons and equipment, fighting a boss, and then moving the story forward once again. All this is strengthened by the excellent supporting cast, specifically Tron Bonne and the Serve Bots, who would not only get their own spin-off game, but also became very familiar to all of us Marvel vs. Capcom 2 sickos out there. Legends was followed up a few years later with a sequel that built upon the foundation of the original in almost every way. Tighter controls, a more compelling story with heavy traces of Studio Ghibli, and some excellent locales to visit. Just check out this amazing bar complete with a crackling fireplace, empty bottles, a chest nook, and a TV in the corner playing an adaptation of Mega Man fighting Gutsman. As a big fan of both bars in video games and in real life, this one gets my seal of approval.
No matter what happens.
Sadly, Mega Man Legends 2 ended on a cliffhanger that would never see a resolution. While a capper to the trilogy was announced for the Nintendo 3DS in 2010, it was closely followed by news that Keiji Inafune, who was the global head of production at Capcom, as well as the unofficial shepherd of all things Mega Man at the time, had parted ways with the company. Legends 3 sputtered on for another year, launching a website called the Dev Room, where fans could vote in polls, interact with developers, and give feedback on the game's progress. This would be coupled with the Mega Man Legends 3 prototype version, a paid demo / vertical slice that was announced, but sadly never saw the light of day. While those ideas were novel and kinda underbaked at the time, it's fascinating to see how commonplace they are today in a world filled with crowdfunding campaigns, two-way communication during development, and the ubiquity of early access. Keiji Inafune tried to tap into the magic one last time in 2015 with Red Ash, a spiritual successor to the Legends series, but the poorly planned Kickstarter failed to reach its goal, and the project has been AWOL for the better part of a decade. I think a lot about what Mega Man Legends could have become if Capcom had stuck with it as they moved into the PS2 and GameCube generation. What the leap in hardware could have done for the colorful aesthetic and vibrant worlds. I can imagine sequels filled with themed dungeons that can be completed in any order, rewarding you with a power-up that not only gives you more combat verbs, but also opens up new avenues for traversal and puzzle solving. A world where Mega Man Legends 3 could have redefined the series in the same way that Resi 4 did. Maybe somewhere out there there's a universe where the Capcom 5 were a Capcom 6. But it's not all doom and gloom. The vibes of Mega Man Legends still live on, particularly in the indie space. Games like Frogun, Pseudo Regalia, Sushi Ben, and upcomers like Abyss Zero and Airframe Ultra are all carrying the torch for that timeless aesthetic. And this extends to localization projects as well, with the wonderful Hilltop not only translating the previous Japan-only Dr. Slump PS1 game into English, but recently doing the same with the Mega Man Legends 2 prologue that has never seen the light of day in the West. As for official releases, Capcom hasn't been shy about bringing collections of old Mega Man games to modern hardware, with the core games, X, Zero, and Battle Network branches all making a return. While Legends is still legally available to buy on PSN via your PS3 or Vita, it feels like a collection of Legends 1 and 2 and the Misadventures of Tron Bonne on PC and modern consoles with a handful of bonus features and quality of life tweaks would do gangbusters. And who knows, seeing as how we live in a world where the legal web surrounding Marvel vs. Capcom was able to be untangled, anything seems possible. Maybe the success of a collection like this could help fuel the fires at Capcom to finally finish the story of Mega Man Volnut. There's chatter about the RE engine being used to explore open worlds and more Capcom franchises with Dragon's Dogma 2, Monster Hunter Wilds, and Resident Evil 9. While that's all well and good, imagine that tech being used to bring a Saturday morning anime to life. But until then, I guess we'll just have to keep kicking that can down the road.
Hey, Javed here, the one behind the edit for this video. This was an absolute blast to create. I'd never played Mega Man Legends, so this was great. This was awesome to just have a chance to dig deep and edit something that I knew nothing about. Marty did such a great job with the script. That dude is a wealth of knowledge. I'm always so shocked when I read his scripts. He has such a rounded understanding of each topic, which is amazing to me. After editing this video, I can see why there's such a cult following for Mega Man. There's so much charm. So yeah, I hope you stick around. The next couple of episodes are gonna be as incredible, if not more incredible. Thanks guys, bye bye.